Well, good evening. My name is Justin Hodges. Hi, Dr. Barton. This is my Learning Forward Standards presentation. Today is June 29th, even though this is dated June 25th. It's the time between composing this and the recording. Forgive my appearance. I just got back from the beach. Anyway, let's let it rip. So, the Learning Forward Standards, here's just a general introduction. These are 11 general standards grouped into 3 categories to guide high-quality professional development for educators. Overall, what I notice personally from these is they do the very simple but not easy task of the eternal question for all educators when we're in a professional development. Why are we not being taught in the way that we are told to teach our students? Ways that are backed by research for either long-term memory or acquisition or, synthesis, creativity. A lot of it becomes sit and get. These, from either the approach or the content, these standards do well to address a lot of our biggest challenges in a organized and systematic way. You'll see them summarized here. I just took these images from the website. And they give, and these we will go into deeper, more depth on all of these in the coming slides. They're grouped into 3 main categories: rigorous content for each learner, transformational processes, and conditions for success. And the bold here are the 11 standards themselves. So let's just get right into it. So we're going to start by going through the rigorous content for each learner standards. We're going to start by focusing at the learning practices standard under that. These standards ensure that equal attention is paid not only to quality instructional practice, but their intersection with the myriad student identities in the classroom with an aim to leverage their diversity rather than just account for it, right? Early on in my career, I remember differentiation was, I say that with scare quotes. Differentiation is real, content, process, product based off aptitude, readiness, and interest, but sometimes it'd be like, oh, well, culturally, these students might not understand, so you're going to have to account for that, rather than from the lens of, hey, this is another point of view that we can leverage because it is knowledge. These standards do well to do that. This one right here, third point, is my favorite. Advanced competency to, quote, embrace student assets through instruction rather than view diversity as a, quote, unquote, deficit. Big problem in this country. So we try to change it in our rooms one by one. Under the rigorous content for each learner standards, the next would be the curriculum assessment and instruction standards, or as I'll just call them, the CAI standards. These emphasize the development and proliferation of research-backed quality materials, instruments, strategies, and assessment practices to develop the toolbox for every teacher in the building. Educator preparation programs are tasked with having to do too much. Without knowing what you'll teach, what these students may teach in the future. How can you really give them the in-depth skills that approaches that will be relevant to them, that they will remember? There really is no way to account for it. This is where professional development's biggest responsibility is, in my opinion. The field of education is so vast and complex and ever-changing that people cannot be expected to come into the profession knowing this stuff well. You just can't until you've done it. These standards do well to, build the capacity of looking at data as well as turning that into actual, instruction in the classroom and strategies and just navigating it all. Curriculum assessment and instruction could be its own 30-minute presentation. Their emphasis to me on diversifying approaches to assessment, working together with colleagues. It's too much. This is an impossible job on a good day. Let's not make it harder for ourselves. We are all doing the same thing. Let's not reinvent the wheel. And that's what these standards emphasize, and I really appreciate that. The next one would be the professional expertise standard, and this kind of goes in conjunction with the last one. We are supposed to be experts in a field that is so vast that it's hard for anybody to be a true expert in it. This really connects. They kind of dovetail off the CAI standards. They emphasize research-based, high-impact strategies with an emphasis on connecting those approaches that we talk about in curriculum assessment and instruction with the actual standards that we have to teach. And this goes into unpacking standards, which I think is a very valuable skill for all educators. In addition, they also promote the importance of cyclical data analysis to inform future planning. You cannot have a curriculum fully planned out on day one. You just can't. Humans are too complex. So once again, this comes back to the continuous monitoring and the cyclical, the emphasis on iterating over cycles until you get it as close to right as you can, is just pragmatic and realistic. All right. So the next set of standards are the transformational processes standards, and I'm just going to read the quote here. Standards within the transformational processes frame describe process elements of professional learning, explaining how educators learn in ways that sustain significant changes in their knowledge, skills, practices, and mindsets. And overall, to me, what that communicates is we are applying real teaching principles to the way we teach teachers. Even though we're teachers, we are still human, despite what everybody thinks, right? So first one here are learning drivers, and I really like this. It's an interesting standard. I've never really looked at things in this way. In order to successfully transform the shape of publication for the better, the learning drivers standards encourage critical introspection and evaluation on the part of the teacher so they may better navigate new ideas and approaches in a sustainable and equitable way. This promotes collaboration, but it also promotes equity. There are a lot of, points of view in our staffs that get muffled out. We do have our rock star teachers that everybody listens to. We have our, vociferous teachers everybody listens to, for better or for worse. But when we start to encourage introspection, what are my biases and things like that? If you think about the way you think, that's never a futile endeavor. We want ourselves as a staff to be self-aware, right? And that's what these promote by not only looking within ourselves, but recognizing it within our colleagues. Listening actively and responding appropriately. That last standard is something that every human on this planet needs continual practice at, myself included. In a human business like ours, so many challenges could be solved quicker through that one single standard. And it's one I really hope to have the opportunity to explore if I find myself in a position of leadership and I have some say in how we go about professional development. Under transformational processes, the next standard is evidence. And the evidence standards guide professional learning that encourages teachers to view their work through an evidence-focused lens that expands and enriches their understanding of the many, almost infinite different modes and applications of data. Additionally, I think this middle one, prioritize quality over quantity of data, that standard helps to curtail this commonly held belief, especially when we're talking about data, that more is always better. It's not. You have to clean data, quality data, but when we aren't, just like diets, when we're not conscious of what we eat, bad things can happen. It's always important to remember that we need to be conscious of what we're actually looking at, as well as what can be done with each piece of data. It can be tiresome, tedious work, but to just be mindful of, all these numbers are people and all these numbers are some form of learning, and they can be imperfect. It is a complex process. We want simplicity, but this is not where you find simplicity. And so it needs to be approached that way. And these standards promote that, that kind of just open-minded approach, as well as, that expertise. These are actual skills that need to be taught. No one is born a good data analyst, right? And it's important. It informs everything that we do. So the next one are the learning designs. And this, to me, is a really interesting way to look at just the idea of how we design these processes in the classroom. And what I appreciate about these standards, because the transformational processes standards are all trying to say, how do we make a culture among our staff informed by our professional development and interactions that collectively give us all an open mind and an approach that we can transform education, because, no matter how good we got it, this is an imperfect system and people are getting left out. And meanwhile, the people who are excelling could be excelling more. How do we get all of that? It's an impossible task maybe, but we can do better about it. And this one is one of my favorites. So it fishtails off the evidence standards. Part of this is we connect, okay, we've looked at the data. Now, how do we turn it into something? And I think that's something a lot of professional development misses. It's like data is talked about one day, learning approaches are talked about the other day, and oftentimes there's not a lot of, interplay between the two, even though it's kind of expected there will be. As a, leader of professional development, we need to, actively and intentionally encourage that. So these standards give staff a roadmap for how evidence can and should inform future teaching and learning. In this case, the Learning Forward team encourages the use of evidence-based learning goals and the exploration of several approaches to achieve those same goals. So a diversity of approaches with a unity of, objective. This framework promotes flexibility of approach with unity of purpose, a balance that is always hard to strike while leading large and varied staff, as well as students. The next one, then from there, you have to implement it, right? And this, what I like about these implementation standards is they really encourage that whole idea of iteration. It's impossible to get it right the first time. One lesson can be perfect with one class and not with another, and that's okay. That's just our reality. So you have to have the mindset to deal with that. These standards guide educators toward a solution-focused approach while navigating the road to actualizing these transformative changes in a school's approach to instruction. By encouraging evidence-based protocols and promoting the embrace of the complex and messy nature of change, these standards also address the often discouraging or derailing road bumps that are inevitable when a school is trying to implement a large-scale new way of doing things. We can't expect things will go smoothly, and we can't be surprised when they don't. So when the mindset becomes, things might go wrong, what are we going to do when that's part of it? That's real, and that's something we need to teach our students too. It's another, that other thing of like, we need to teach ourselves the way we teach them, or ideally the way we teach them. And this idea of contributing to a culture that values and regularly engages in meaningful, constructive feedback, that's not something that's a professional development lesson either. That's just the interstitial conversations in your hallway, around the copier. Not every conversation needs to be some transformative approach how we're learning. We can talk about the baseball game, but when conversations about teaching and learning are happening, if we can model as leaders and promote a more pragmatic and mature approach of like, yeah, well, it didn't work. Well, we're going to figure it out. That has to come from up top too, as well as your teacher leaders who do it every day. These move into the conditions for success standards, and these are broader. They promote professional development that expands staff's understanding of the vast and interconnected infrastructure that makes our schools run. It's now common knowledge that some of the most major factors that determine a student's readiness and enthusiasm to learn occur well beyond the school walls by processes largely out of our, as staff and teachers, or our students' control. It can feel hopeless, but by centering equity, staff can be given the tools to navigate this complexity and find ways to ameliorate some of these more seemingly insurmountable challenges. I really like this quote that, that among ourselves we establish expectations for equity and create structures to ensure equitable access to learning for all. But this idea of exploring how education is funded and its connection to other elemental aspects of our society. And I should have bolded that for emphasis, including healthcare, childcare, housing, and the workforce. This doesn't mean every lesson has to be some pseudo-Marxist, primer on, all the forces in the world that contribute, but that idea that school is an elemental aspect of a society alongside things like your doctor or the firefighter or the road itself, that, can help to foment that, idea of community, that we are interconnected, we are independent, free, individuals as proud Americans, but we are also interconnected, and this is, our collective responsibility to ourselves. Now, that's a much harder and broader thing to develop among students, but like if that can be fomented among the staff to some extent, or at least acknowledged, I think it would open a lot of eyes. A lot of people, adults, don't think this way. We have so many things going on in our lives, it's hard to stop and think about the things that are taken for granted. And I would put schools right up there, next to the road, and the firefighter, and, your sewer system and clean water. Anyway, that's the more, idealistic version of it. But I also, down here too, Learning Foundation, this is where, we go back to talking about the vision that comes up a lot in Do 4. regularly evaluating and auditing the vision. Because, as we talked about in our discussion a little while ago, or I think it might have been my response to a teacher, they were talking about, oh yeah, the vision was something that was come up with like 20 years ago, and none of the people who are in the building, even are who were there then are not here now. So why do I buy in? The vision changes. Things have changed. It's, especially in the last 20 years, a couple things have happened, So, I just appreciate that, this just kind of goes to show how these standards promote flexibility with an eye on, having a North Star, but understanding the road there is uncharted and might not always be a road. It's probably going to be quicksand. So just being nimble while being principled, right? Also, developing a culture of collaborative inquiry invites teachers to be active professionals and contributors to the field. So much of what we do is hypothesized and analyzed through action research in our own classrooms every day, whether we like it or not. We want something out of the box to work, but everything is action research. In order to maximize our collective potential, leaders and staff will advocate for a more constructive approach to the inevitable challenges that arise with a focus on research-based as well as quote-unquote common sense approaches to our students' learning. The quote I pulled here was, we need to use research, school and system goals, and professional expertise to identify the most relevant and promising collaborative continuous improvement approach. And that's a little jumbled. I might have mistyped it. But, we always talk about collaboration. We always talk, we need to interdisciplinary, vertical teaming, professional learning communities, all the things. But, it says, hey, go in this room and collaborate. And that's kind of it. A lot of people kind of look for each other. Sometimes you have a leader who steps up and does something. Everybody's like, oh, thank God. I'm just going to follow this guy and hopefully he's good. There's also an emphasis on proven models and protocols. There was a specific mention of one, and I think it's in a later slide, the CBAM. I've also heard of other managerial approaches that have come over from the private sector, like Agile, which is a kind of way to organize development teams in software companies that is now being adapted to education to lead teams of 6 to 10 teachers at a time, and it's just a workflow type situation. But we walk into that room as individual teachers. You're rolling the dice if one of them is an effective manager or able to guide that discussion in a sorry, I don't know why I'm going out of focus. Oh well. Anyway, that part here, I would be interested to see what the Learning Standards, Learning Forward team has as an example for these proven models and protocols. A lot of times they just come to us in the form of, some Microsoft Excel or Word template. And that's about it, but it really should be more in depth than that. One of the last standards here for conditions for success is leadership. And these standards emphasize the importance of that multifaceted approach to developing the complex relationships between both school and community leaders. It promotes transparency and inclusivity. In a school that is open, transparent, and inclusive, it enriches its community, even at the cost. It can come at cost. It can be hard. It can sometimes be a small step back for one reason or another. It's complex. But that requires a culture within the school of openness and respect, even when challenges cause tensions to rise. To be authentically open to the community in a real and material way will breed buy-in, which will pay dividends in time. And this quote right here, that we need to prioritize structures and procedures that support individual and collective capacity and skill building among the staff as well as the community, whether it's, getting them in the building, things like that. But transparency, working together is at the core of it all. And if a school can do that, it will pay off one way or another. Okay. And lastly, the most important thing, resources, whether it be time or access to materials, a leadership that is nimble with its allocation of resources, that also prioritizes what does the most good for the most students and staff. That is the primary way that a leadership can either drastically improve or diminish the morale and capacity of the school. We live in a superficial, materialistic society. If you hand me something good, I'm going to like you. And if you don't, I'm going to be mad, right? Or you're going to waste my time. And that's not personal, right? You've been on the receiving end of that. These standards emphasize that idea of continuous monitoring and equity to ensure that the right resources get to the right people, most importantly, at the right time. And that's a big job. And I'm honestly, I'd be interested in looking at concrete ways that these standards are exemplified. That's a messy process. There's finite money. Everybody needs resources. Not everybody can get these resources. So how do you deal with that? And that's different from day to day, school to school. I'd be really interested to read more on their approach to this. And I did enjoy the site. I need to go back on that one and find some of their exemplars. Well, anyway, that's the learning forward standards. I hope this was sufficiently synthesized, but I will just close out by saying what I appreciate overall about this, and I've said this a few times, is that these standards are clearly informed by the experience of real veteran teachers who critically look at their situation and with an eye towards what is going to work. And I see that through like I said, on one hand, you have a lot of flexibility in how things get done, but there's an emphasis on a unity of purpose. And I think that's the right balance. And also the idea of just iteration and continuous monitoring. There is no expectation that we're going to get to some gold standard that we just stick to. That's just not how anything works. So just that this has every standard, each subdomain has a mechanism for iteration or evaluation, or updating, research-based. More research comes out. We have new tools. How the heck is AI going to do anything other than, destroy our abilities to think for ourselves? We need research for that. There's no gold standard for that. And this, I guess that's why it's learning forward. It's towards a future that we do not know. So what can we focus on and control that will put staff and students and the community in the best position to tackle whatever comes their way? And we do that through modeling a positive collaborative community with an emphasis on what works and expertise, valuing those things, valuing those people, treating them right, and giving them what they need. And hopefully it all works. I really hope I get an opportunity to have a part in this for staff one day. Anyway, that's my closing. Here you will find the references. It is just the website. Thank you very much for your time. As always, Dr. Barton, have a good one. Hail Southern.